Last month, while cleaning out the attic, I found my childhood photo album. At first, I smiled at the dusty pages, until I realized every single picture had my face cut out with scissors. My birthday parties, school plays, even family Christmas mornings, just jagged holes where I should have been. When I confronted my mom, she looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "I never wanted you in those memories anyway." I never thought something as simple as an old photo album could change the way I saw my entire life. It happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when the whole house feels damp and heavy, when you're desperate for a distraction. I went up into the attic to dig through boxes I hadn't touched since moving back home temporarily. Dust floated in the air like it had been waiting years just to sting my eyes. The album was buried under blankets and Christmas decorations. I recognized it instantly. Thick, dark blue cover, the gold lettering almost rubbed away. My mother had always been meticulous about preserving memories. Or at least, that's what I believed. She had an album for every year, every event, every milestone. This one, though, was supposed to be mine. I remembered flipping through it as a kid, pointing at my own chubby cheeks, laughing at my messy birthday cakes, but as I opened it now, the smile on my face froze. On the first page, a baby in a yellow onesie sat in a high chair, a cake smeared across the tray. Only the baby wasn't there anymore, just a jagged, knife-like hole cut right through the middle that I turned the page. Same thing. A family photo on Christmas morning. My dad holding a mug, my mom in her robe, my brother tearing into a box. And where I should have been, another hole, sharp and deliberate. I felt my chest tighten as I flipped faster and faster. Every page was the same. My body was there in fragments, someone's hand resting where my shoulder must have been, half a party hat cut down the middle, but never my face. Never me did I sat on the floor of the attic, album balanced on my knees, my heart racing in a way that made me nauseous. Who would do this? Why? The cuts weren't random. They weren't accidental tears from age. They were intentional, precise, as if someone had sat down and carefully erased me from every family memory. I stayed up there for hours, staring at those empty spaces where I should have been. Memories I thought I had weren't just fading. They were being rewritten, destroyed. My 7th birthday, the one with the magician and the balloons, I could almost hear the laughter in my head, but on the page, I wasn't there. Just a magician smiling at nothing. Just kids clapping toward a blank space. That night, I couldn't sleep. The album lay at the foot of my bed, heavy with questions. I replayed every interaction I'd ever had with my mom. She was strict, yes, sometimes cold, but I'd never thought of her as cruel. She cooked for us, drove us to school, showed up at soccer games. At least, I thought she had. Now I wondered if my memory was lying to me, if she had really been there for me, or if she'd only been there for my brother that I decided I couldn't sit with the question forever. The next morning, I carried the album downstairs. My hand shook as I placed it on the kitchen table. My mom was making coffee, humming softly. When she noticed me, she smiled like everything was normal. I slid the album toward her, her smile faded instantly. Her eyes flicked down at the pages, and for a moment, I thought I saw fear. Then it hardened into something else, something cold, like stones settling over her face. Did I ask her why? Just that one word. Why? She didn't flinch. She looked right at me and said, in a flat, steady voice, "Because I never wanted you in those memories anyway." The words hit harder than anything else she could have done. I felt the floor tilt under me. My own mother, the woman who'd raised me, fed me, put band-aids on my scraped knees, was telling me she'd erased me on purpose. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the silence that followed was even worse than her words. She turned back to the coffee pot as if nothing had happened, as if the conversation was over. I stood there, album under my hand, and realized for the first time that I might not really know the woman who had raised me at all. I spent the rest of that morning in silence, walking around the house as if it were no longer mine. Every picture frame on the walls felt suspicious now, every smile in those photographs suspect. My brother's graduation portrait hung proudly. In the hallway, family pictures lined the living room shelves. But I noticed something I'd never truly paid attention to before. Out of the dozens of framed photos scattered across the house, barely a handful included me. And in those that did, I was usually standing off to the side, small and almost cropped out by the way they were framed. Maybe I had overlooked it before. Maybe I had trained myself not to see. But now I couldn't unsee it. I wasn't just missing. From the photo album, I had always been missing, in ways subtle and invisible until now that I thought back to my childhood. I remembered how my mom praised my brother endlessly, his good grades, his talent in sports, even his ability to tell jokes at the dinner table. My achievements, on the other hand, were always met with a sort of muted acknowledgement. I didn't think much of it then. Some parents just had favorites, I told myself. But sitting with that album in my hands, I realized it was more than favoritism. It was erasure. The worst part was the way she had said it. I never wanted you in those memories anyway. Not in anger, not as if she'd slipped up in the heat of the moment. She said it like a fact, like she had been holding it in for years. That I tried to talk to my dad later that day, but it felt like talking to a locked door. He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his hands, saying things like, "Your mom has her reasons and let's not dig up the past." That only made me more furious. What reasons could justify cutting your own child out of a life, out of their own history? I couldn't stop thinking about the scissors. The image haunted me. My mom sitting at the kitchen table, album spread open, slicing my face out of every photo while the rest of the family went about their lives. How many nights did she spend doing that? Did my dad know? Did my brother? That evening, I went back to the attic and started digging through other boxes. I found more albums, but they told the same story. Holidays, birthdays, vacations, anywhere. I should have been. There were holes, empty spaces, missing pieces. It wasn't just one album. She had done this across my entire childhood. At some point, I stopped flipping pages and just sat there in the dim light, surrounded by scraps of what used to be my life. My hands were trembling, my stomach twisted into knots. It wasn't just about photos anymore. It was about the truth. My mother didn't just dislike me. She had wanted to erase me completely, to rewrite the story of our family as if I had never existed, and once I let that thought in, it grew into something darker. If she could erase me from memories, what else was she capable of erasing? I tried to convince myself there had to be a misunderstanding, that maybe my mom was just angry, or that her words had come out harsher than she intended. But the more I searched through the house, the less room there was for doubt. It wasn't just albums. I noticed missing yearbooks too, whole sections where my photos should have been had pages torn out. In one, the corner where my name had been printed was scratched away with PEN. It wasn't neglect. It was deliberate. The next day, I tried to bring it up with my brother, Daniel. He had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, I resented him sometimes, but I also depended on him. He was my older brother, the one who drove me to school when I missed the bus, the one who slipped me candy when mom wasn't looking. If anyone could help me understand, I thought it would be him. That I caught him in the driveway while he was unloading groceries from his car. I told him about the album, about mom's words, about how dad had brushed me off. Daniel went quiet, his hands frozen on the grocery bag. For a moment, I thought he was shocked. But when he finally looked at me, his expression wasn't surprise. It was guilt. He muttered something about mom always being a little complicated, and told me not to let it get to me. He said the past was the past, and that I should move on. That phrase, move on, hit me harder than I expected. It sounded rehearsed, like something he'd been told to say before. I pressed him for answers, but he shut down quickly. His jaw tightened, and he told me to drop it. That was when I realized he knew more than he was willing to admit. He wasn't confused. He was protecting her. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation. Why would my own brother defend her after what she'd done? Unless he'd been part of it somehow. Unless he had grown up watching her cut me out and decided it was easier to pretend it wasn't happening. Memories started resurfacing. Times when I'd ask why there were no baby pictures of me displayed, and Daniel would distract me with something else. Times when mom would introduce him proudly to her friends while barely acknowledging me. Even the way she corrected me when I spoke too loudly at the dinner table, while laughing at Daniel's every word. These weren't just small differences in parenting styles. This was a pattern that I started to wonder if my very existence had been some kind of mistake. I remembered once, when I was around 10, overhearing a late-night argument between my parents. I couldn't recall every word, but I remembered my mom's voice, sharp and bitter, saying something like, "I told you I didn't want this." At the time, I thought she was talking about money, or maybe the house. Now I wasn't so sure. The silence in the house grew heavier every day after that. Meals felt staged, like we were all actors playing roles in a family that wasn't real. My dad stared at his plate, Daniel checked his phone, and my mom moved around the kitchen with the same cold efficiency as always. I felt like a ghost at the table, sitting in a seat I was never meant to occupy. At night, I dreamed about those photographs, about the hollow spaces where my face should have been. Sometimes I imagined them filled with shadows instead, shapes that looked almost like me but twisted, blurred, as if even my absence was something ugly. I'd wake up in a sweat, my heart pounding, and wonder if maybe that was the point. Maybe she hadn't just wanted me gone from the pictures. Maybe she wanted me gone, period. I didn't know it yet, but the truth was about to come out. And once I heard it, I would never look at my family the same way again. The more I thought about it, the more unbearable it became to stay in that house without answers. My mother's words clung to me like a stain I couldn't wash off, and every room seemed filled with reminders of her rejection. But the worst part wasn't what I already knew, it was what I didn't. Why? Why erase me, but not Daniel? Why keep me under her roof all these years if she hated me so much? I knew I wouldn't get the truth from her directly, so I tried a different approach. One evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I went back to the attic. I rummaged through boxes I hadn't touched before, the ones labeled in my mother's handwriting. Old documents, receipts, stacks of letters tied with string. Most of it was ordinary, but at the bottom of one box I found a manila envelope with my name written across the front. My pulse hammered in my ears as I opened it. Inside were hospital forms, old medical records, and, most shocking, copies of birth certificates. I pulled mine out first. Nothing unusual at a glance, my full name, my date of birth. But when I looked closer, I noticed something strange. Under father's name, there was a line drawn through the text, like it had been corrected. My dad's name was typed neatly, but underneath the ink, faint but visible, there was another name scratched out. I sat frozen, staring at it under the dim attic light. Another man's name. I flipped through the other documents, and the pieces started clicking together in the ugliest way possible. Letters from a hospital billing office. A single sheet with the words paternity test stamped at the top. I couldn't find the full results, but I didn't need them. It was enough to know there had been questions about whether my dad was really my dad, and that was when it hit me. My mother's hatred wasn't random. It wasn't favoritism, or stress or personality differences. It was personal. I wasn't my father's child. The realization hollowed me out. Everything suddenly made sense. The way she doted on Daniel, the way she looked at me with cold detachment. To her, I wasn't part of the family she wanted. I was proof of a mistake. Proof of something she regretted so much she tried to cut me out of existence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake, staring at the documents spread across my bed, feeling like my entire life had been built on a lie. And yet, even as the truth settled in, I had more questions than answers. Who was the man whose name had been erased? Did my dad know the truth? Did Daniel? The next morning, I tried again to talk to my father. I brought the envelope down to the kitchen and placed it in front of him. He barely glanced at the papers before pushing them back toward me, his face pale. He said, "I shouldn't be digging into things that don't matter anymore." His voice trembled when he said it, and I realized then he did know. He had known all along. That moment hurt more than my mother's rejection. At least she was honest about not wanting me. My dad, the man I'd idolized as a kid, had chosen silence. He had let me grow up believing I was loved equally, when deep down, he must have seen me as someone else's child. I wanted to scream at him, to force him to admit it out loud, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I left the table and shut myself in my room. I thought about confronting Daniel again, demanding the truth this time, but part of me was terrified of hearing what he might say. Because if my mother's hatred came from me being a reminder of her mistake, what did that make me to him? A half-brother? An intruder? A secret he'd always known but never shared? By the end of that day, I realized there was no turning back. I couldn't unlearn what I'd discovered. The only thing left was to dig deeper, even if it destroyed whatever pieces of family I had left. I couldn't sit in silence anymore. The unanswered questions gnawed at me worse than the rejection itself. So I went straight to the source. My brother, Daniel, was in the garage, tinkering with his car, when I confronted him. I didn't waste time on small talk. I told him I knew about the birth certificate, about the paternity test, about the man's name scratched out. For the first time in years, he actually looked at me with something other than annoyance. But it wasn't sympathy, it was dread. His lips pressed together like he was holding back words he'd been told never to say. Finally, he exhaled and muttered, "You weren't supposed to find that." I asked him who the man was. At first, he shook his head, but when I refused to leave, he finally gave in. He told me my biological father wasn't some stranger. It was someone my mom had known before she married Dad. A short-lived relationship she'd tried to bury, one that ended badly. According to Daniel, the man had left before I was born. But the detail that crushed me was what came next. My mother had begged Dad to raise me as his own. He agreed, but she never forgave herself for the mistake. And every time she looked at me, she didn't just see me, she saw him. That was the reason for everything. The coldness, the erasure, the scissors through the photos. I wasn't just an unwanted reminder. I was proof of a choice she wished she had never made. Did I ask Daniel if Dad had hated me too? He said no, that Dad had tried his best. But even as he said it, I thought of Dad's silence at the kitchen table, the way he avoided my eyes when I pushed the papers in front of him. Trying his best and truly loving me were not the same thing. What cut even deeper was realizing Daniel had always known. He admitted Mom had told him when he was a teenager, to prepare him. He'd lived his whole life with the truth while. I stumbled around in the dark, wondering why I was never good enough. That I left the garage shaking with rage. My entire family, Mom, Dad, and Daniel, had built a wall of silence around me. They let me grow up believing I was part of something I never really belonged to. Worse, they treated me like I should have figured it out on my own. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg for answers. I just sat with the ugly truth. My mom hated me because I wasn't hers in the way she wanted. My dad kept quiet because loving me would always be complicated. And my brother chose loyalty to them over honesty with me. For the first time in my life, I started to wonder if cutting myself out of this family might be the only way to survive. After that conversation with Daniel, something inside me finally settled. The truth was ugly, but it was truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is easier to carry than silence. I stopped waiting for my mom to love me the way she loved him. I stopped, hoping my dad would ever sit me down and call me his child without hesitation. And I stopped expecting my brother to treat me as anything other than the secret he'd been forced to protect. The next morning, I packed a single suitcase. No ceremony, no shouting match. I didn't want a dramatic exit. They didn't deserve it. I left the photo albums where I'd found them, because those holes on the pages weren't mine to fix. They were hers. Before I closed the front door, I looked once more at the house that had shaped me. It wasn't a home, it was a place, where I had learned how absence can weigh heavier than presence, how silence can scream louder than words. I didn't hate them, not even my mother. Hate requires connection, and whatever thread once tied me to them had been cut long ago. What I felt was emptiness, and in that emptiness, freedom. That I don't know if I'll ever find my biological father, or if I even want to. Right now, I only know this. My life won't be defined by the holes someone else carved out of it. For the first time in years, I feel like I exist.